with what we were talking about, Leman Shemecha, for your name's sake, showing this interconnection of the Jewish people and God's name. In other words, the divine ideal connected to the Jewish people, revealed through the Jewish people. Our reality, our living reality of a nation in the land of Israel expresses the energy, the light, radiates this goodness, this holiness that from here goes to all the world, right? From Zion goes out Torah, the word of God from Yerushalayim. But here in Yechezkel 20, you see this overview of history, Ezekiel 20.
Man, I made good. I don't know.
Chapter 20, in Yechezkel you see this historical overview, and like I said, you see this central repeating theme. So we'll start, again, since you hopefully saw it all in the homework, you looked it up, when the Jews are doing bad, and God says to them, I will punish you. Maybe look at verse 7. I took you out of Egypt to bring you to the land of milk and honey. And in verse 7, said to them, you did bad. You went after the idols of Egypt. And in verse 8, you, how do you say in English? You defiled my, you rebelled against me. V'lo avu lishmo, you didn't listen to me. And I was about to pour out my fury to destroy you. What does it say in verse 9? You want to read, Moshe?
Sure, but I acted for my name's sake, that it should not be profane in the sight of the nations among whom they were. And in his sight I made myself known to them, in bringing them out of the land of Mitzrayim.
So here again, so why doesn't he do so, right? The verse before, you deserve to be destroyed, to be wiped out. But I will not do so, for my name's sake. Again, the commentaries explain here that if God would destroy us, again, it would show that God was unable to bring us out of Egypt, to bring us to the land of Israel, so he just killed us in the desert. Over and over again, this theme of the eternity of Israel, so to speak, that God's name depends on that. So we said not just this subjective understanding that they'll say God is weak and he couldn't keep you in the land or couldn't bring you to Israel, but objectively, the vehicle that expresses this name, this God, this goodness in the world, this divine content that was plowed lower down, this anchor that's lowered down to the world, to lift up the world, to radiate to the world, to elevate the world, to sanctify all of life, all of existence, if that's through the Jewish people in the land of Israel. If they're destroyed, God forbid, then my name is destroyed. My ideal will not be able to be fulfilled. So that can't be. In other words, therefore I will do so, again, for my name's sake. And then again, look in verse 13, the Jews again rebel against his word. In the desert, they didn't follow his laws. And then I was about to pour out my fury upon you. In verse 14, what does it say, David? You don't have it, you're in something else. 14.
14? But I acted for the sake of my name, that it should not be desecrated in the eyes of the
Again,
nations.
right, the repetition, L'shma leman shemi, for my name's sake, over and over again, right, you got the idea, but it doesn't stop there. If you want to go in verse 21, that you, again, another period of history, you didn't keep my, I gave you Shabbat, you rebelled, you didn't keep my laws and my statutes, and I was poured out my fury upon you. And verse 22, V'as leman shemi, that it should not be desecrated amongst the nations, over and over again. If I would do what you deserved, what you would give you what you deserve, that would destroy my name. You'd be self-defeating, because you're the means. You're the created divine receptacle that reveals this name in the world. That's how I created the world. Right? Amzu yitzarti li titi yisaperu. This nation I have created unto me to say my name in the world, to bring down this ideal, this living ideal, not a philosophy that someone else can copy the idea. It's a nice idea. But the living reality, like 2 pieces of metal that we spoke about, that conduct electricity. 2 pieces of this. Am Yisrael in the land of Israel is the divine conductor, the conductor of divinity, of godliness, of goodness, of holiness, of righteousness in this world.
Could you say that God's making a point of saying that you're kind of like my mascot, you know?
Okay.
That you're
That's what it means.
directly representing
My name, right. That's what we're saying throughout. We've seen that throughout the Tanakh. You're my mascot, you're the vehicle, the kli, the light that comes to the world, created such that this comes through this vehicle. Again, that's a divine creation, not our doing, our acceptance. That's the reality, first and foremost. It's a priori, that's the created. Again, the commentaries emphasize all this, but we won't go through all that. you have again, actually, if you look in verse 33, 34, there it says that they're in exile and they decide to be like everyone else. Look, we're in exile. When you're in Rome, do as the Romans. God has left us, so we should maybe, what happened in Purim, we discussed a little bit. The Jews in Shushan, they fell after the destruction of the temple. That's it, God left us. You see that Bemet, the uniqueness of the Jewish people has ended. The temple destroyed. They couldn't believe that reality of prophecy of 1,000 years up till then. The temple, the divine, tangible connection to God, and all of a sudden that's lost, destroyed. Again, we've left them. So they felt maybe, so you might as well go to the party that Ahasuerus made for the demise of the Jewish people. You're not going back. And they participated. Because that's it. I guess we're finished. Might as well just eat, drink, and be merry here and enjoy the luxury, that hedonistic pleasure that Ahasuerus is offering us, to be like everyone else. That's what it says here. Alel rucham, that which you wish to think, to be like others and say we're like everyone else. It will not be with outstretched arm, verse 33, and with fury poured out, I will be king over you. The commentators say here, the Mitzudot, what does it mean, this fury poured out? What do you mean God will pour out fury from the hand will come out of heaven and pour, fury upon you, fire and brimstone? It says, I will put the hate of the nations, I'll put hate in the hearts of the nations to expel you, to take you out of your land. In other words, the nations will come against us. It doesn't come from above, so to speak. God, this infusion that works within history, within reality, that the nations will wake up and remind you that you're different, that you don't belong to them, to kick you out of their land, as we saw throughout history. So again, if you see, then it says, I'll bring you back with fire, how do you say, I'll gather you from the exiles, bring you back to the land with an outstretched arm, with a strong hand and outstretched arm, with fury poured out. Again, in verse 41, in Yechezkel 20, I will again take you out from amongst the nations, gather you from the different lands, and sanctify my name in your eyes, and then you shall know that I am God. Now, the sanctification of my name is by bringing you back to the land, which enables that flow of godliness, of goodness, of energy, of positive light to come to the world, that mankind changes, the culture, the ideas, what is the importance of man? What is the centrality of human culture? Of just the money and honor or whatever makes the world go round, or goodness, righteousness, of justice and honesty and giving, and altruistic idealism of being good for others and just wanting to do good. They become a new culture. That culture is based on, the driving force of man will be this seeking goodness, seeking good for all. That's the neshama of Am Yisrael. That's what comes out through this living nation. There's, maybe I'll bring you one time, an interview with Dr. Sabin, with the Sabin polio vaccine years ago. He came to Israel. They wanted to make him, the president of Weizmann Institute, I think, and they interviewed him in the newspaper. I have to read it to you because it's, I don't know if I have it here, no. But it's very...
You Jewish?
Yes. And he says, I do have it. What I just said now of the essence of the Jewish people is this divinely, how do I call it, implanted holiness or goodness, of searching for justice. So you can say that's nice, we say this, we talk about this, we're religious, we're Jews, we're patriotic. Here is this, again, Dr. Sabin. He says he's not let's call it what we call a religious Jew. But he says in this interview, they ask him, what do you think about, what is your connection to Judaism, your... where does it start? He says, I always identify myself as a Jew. What was his awakening? What made him feel this connection to the Jewish people? When I had this inner awakening, the will to fight for something of justice. In other words, I woke up, I had this inspiration to do something good, to fight for human justice. He was like not just a scientist, medicine. He was also a fighter for human rights, etc. So he says, when I had that desire to help others, to fight for human rights, for justice, that's where I felt my Jewishness. I felt always that the inclination for justice woke up in me, not as an outcome of shikul intellectuali mefukach, not as a sober intellectual consideration, like is it right, is it wrong, this is what you're supposed to do, but rather can mean dachaf nafshi tavua meleida, an inner drive planted from nature. This Jewish drive that he felt that comes from this Jewish soul, without his saying the words. I mean, he says that's what I felt his Jewishness, in that this inner drive. We learned about, right, that we didn't see it inside so much, the Igeret of Rav Kook, Igeret 555, Igeret Takana, the famous Igeret of Kook, talks about the two aspects of the Jewish people. There's this, call it the divine, divinely infused created essence, and the free will that each one of us has. How we live, if we live according to that, we express that, we bring that to fulfillment or not. We can be religious and we can deny the existence of God. We can do a lot of things, our free will. But first, there's an inner essence, an inherent, call it, I don't know, super conscious that precedes our free will and our understanding and belief in what we do and our actions. But here he defines it in his words. Rav Kook calls it this inner implanted in nature. So here he calls it this dachaf nafshi tavua belida. Again, this is a translation from the English, probably, in the Hebrew newspaper, but this is from the Ma'ariv in 1970. He died in 1993, I believe. So he says, but he feels this drive for goodness, for justice, comes out of this inner instinctive drive, this impulse from birth, not as an intellectual thing that decides it maybe yes, it's from within. I would say that this inclination for justice and mercy is found relatively more by the Jews than by non-Jews. This sensitivity for justice by the Jewish people came to expression in practically speaking, in history in many ways. And the things are known. Again, this isn't a religious Jew. This isn't coming to prove Rav Kook and to say, but mamish, it's the significance of Am Yisrael, how he felt this connection. That my Jewishness is what caused me to drive to justice or to causes for social order and goodness, tikkun olam. And he says it's known in history, this drive that the Jewish people are most outstanding in this inner drive. I can only give an example, or I can give an example and a more verification of this phenomenon from my experience, from my wide experience in my contact with my colleagues. When I was teaching in America, when I was teaching or learning in America, I wouldn't be far from the truth if I would recognize who is a Jew according to their hechaltzut, their they say like a chalutz, or not volunteering, a chalutz, like the pioneering. The Jews that have run out first to fight for matarat tzodeket kolshi, when they fight for any just causes. Oh, there's a story that tells about it. He went to with Einstein, I think, in a class, and he told Einstein, I can tell you who the Jews are. They have this unique characteristic, this inner implanted characteristic, seeking justice and good for all. And how can you tell? Whatever. He said, look, I'll do a test. And I guess in the classroom, he suggested some type of experiment. Like you've had the different type of experiment. Sometimes they give the shocks and whatever, all the different things that you've heard about. But nevertheless, he suggested, I don't know what it was, but he said some social experiment, but it caused certain injustice in it, certain things that weren't moral, weren't good in this experiment. I don't know what it was, he doesn't say. And their hands went up, no, you can't do that, that's not right, whatever. He said, write down their names, and they were all Jews. That's what the story says. That's what he's referring to here when he says, I know from my experience that their pioneering, their need for justice is more outstanding. Again, relatively, it's not that non-Jews are unrighteous and all the Jews are holy and justice. There are evil Jews and there are righteous non-Jews. But here he says it himself, that he feels that even his going out for justice, his fighting for these causes, is not some intellectual decision, whatever, but rather from an inner drive as a Jew. That's what he says. So that's this Professor Sabin. Now, getting back to that, so that's what it says. And when the Jews come back to the land of Israel, that manifestation of a nation that lives, that drive for good, starts to permeate and radiate from here to the world, and the man changes. It's a different, man becomes more of that goodness that rubs off on all, and that's our goal, right? L'taken olam malchut shaddai. So he said, you come back to the land and you shall sanctify my name, and you shall know that I am God, bringing you back to the land of Israel. In the verse number 44, just to finish off here, this chapter 20, and you shall know that I am God. 44, David, in the same chapter. Moshe, who has it first?
I have it.
Then you will know that. Then you will know that I am Hashem when I act with you for my name's sake, and not in accord with your evil ways and your corrupt deeds. O house of Israel, the word of the Lord Hashem Elohim.
In other words, here again, I'm not doing it for your sakes. You're not deserving. If I went by your ways, you long ago, as we saw over and over again, through all the Tanakh, we saw different sources how this deserving of punishment, whatever, to fix our ways, but it can't be disconnected because that's the vehicle he created. God's plan won't go bankrupt. It's not like it can be, there's other forces outside of God's will. Man has free will. Man can go ruin the plan. We saw that in the Ramchal, right? The Dat Tfunot, that there's a limit to free will. We have free will. We can go against, we can do bad. But even that, there's an extent that they later plugs in, we said, this other dimension, what Rabbi Ramchal calls the Hanagata Yichud, the ultimate goal plan that supersedes the free will level. That it can't let, the free will doesn't reach the point that it can destroy the plan, destroy God's goal for bettering and perfecting all of existence, all of mankind. And that comes through this vehicle, this created vehicle that will not be changed, that cannot, Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker. We'll see the other, we'll maybe see other sources, how this unchanging reality, that this is the vehicle. In, I'll just read to you, in Yechezkel 39, and then we'll get back to chapter 36, is what we started from, Yechezkel 36. Then it says the exile is the desecration of God's name, right? The very fact, that you're in exile prevents my name, my ideal, from coming to fulfillment in the world. That's why I'm bringing you back to the land. Why? Why does he bring us back to the land? Because we're so holy and religious, and they did all tshuva, everyone, or rather, what does it say there in Yechezkel 36?
No, do not desecrate my
For
name.
my name's sake. And when are we going to read that? This Shabbat. The Haftarah, this Shabbat, Parshat Parah, is Yechezkel 36. So let's get to that. We'll get back to that.
It's Parshat Shmini right now.
Right, but the Arba Parshiot before Pesach, we read like we had Shkalim, and now it's Parshat Parah. Okay. We had Zachor, now Parah. Okay, just what you don't have in front of you, the Rashi, but there's in Yechezkel 39, verse 7, it says, my name, my holy name, I will make known to you through the Jewish people, and I'll not let my name be desecrated. Rashi says here, Shiflutam Shi Yisrael Chilu Shmohu. The diminishing, the demeaning, the lowliness of the Jewish people is a Chilul Hashem, desecrates God's name. So we get on the one level, we said, on the fact that the Jewish people are desecrated. You see that the nations say, wow, we can beat you up, we can destroy you, we can exile you, we're stronger than you, or our God is stronger than your God. But we said the deeper level, the objective level, so to speak, that when Jews are not able to fulfill their lives properly and living in Eretz Yisrael, that is Chilul Hashem, that destroys, that holds up the name of God, the ideal of God, the ideal of creation, not just some spiritual, religious thing. The goal of all of existence to connect to this divine, and all of life is so sanctified and fulfilled with meaning and super life. It's not like it's religious is less life. It's more life, connected to that source, like the branch connected to its roots. There's more life. People think now, there's what you mentioned last week, I think, religion and there's Torah. There's religion and life. There's Torah and life. Like life, the fulfillment, all the activities of man, the wisdoms and the dealings of government and army and agriculture and all that. And then there's religion, secluded. You have to leave all that, separate from all that, separation of church and state. But God, the oneness of God that permeates it, there's more life when you're connected to the divine, more holy and more goodness. There's more life, more success in the physical. The body is success. We said to the point that it becomes so connected that there's no gap. There's one, there's one
Unified.
This continuation, this continuum of life from the spiritual down to the physical. The physical becomes ultimately immortal, becomes so elevated that it becomes so connected to the source of life, the infinite. There's no reason that the body should deteriorate and decay. That's after the sin of Adam Rishon became this separation of the branch, so to speak, from its roots. Now the branch starts to peter out and dies and then separates. But when we connect it, all of life, and life again, so doing the Torah and the connection to the divine will is not some, like I said, cancellation of life, of sacrificing life with life, what people call life, in order to be religious. It's the connection to God, is like reconnecting the branch to its roots. It's the fullness of life, super life, more life than we're used to today. That's where we're headed, as we'll see soon in Yechezkel. But we want a few more sources, maybe, quickly. I'll just skip a few that maybe wait, we did Yeshayahu already, right? So that's it for now. I think we saw Yeshayahu. So now we'll go back to our chapter in Yechezkel 36. So if you can go back or up from chapter 20 now to 36, where we left off, where we started from, so to speak, this whole, I don't call it a detour, but now you saw that, maybe one more thing, because we mentioned it's not only in the Torah and the Tanakh, but all the prayers. All of our prayers are based on this idea of Leman Shemecha.
Ezekiel 36?
Yeah, but now I wanted to finish up with one more thing. I told you to look up or to pay attention, in the Tachanun prayer. There you saw, hopefully, yeah, B'Siddur, very good. In the Tachanun prayer, how over and over again, this theme, if you call it a theme, of Leman Shemecha, that our prayers are God, not for us, not for our sake, not because we're worthy and deserving, but that for the dimension of your name. In other words, our prayers and our requests are not for our personal benefit. It's more like idealistic. It's for the good of all of creation, for your name, for that plan of goodness that you wish to bestow upon the world, that goodness should be revealed and realized. And for that we request, and that we pray for. That. So we mentioned, it's in the beginning of the prayers, I don't want to go through all of the prayers, we mentioned in the Shemona Esrei 3 times, right? In the beginning, the end, and the middle of the Shemona Esrei, right? The main prayer every day, right? Mevi Goel Ivnei V'nehem, to bring the Redeemer. Why? Leman Shemo. And also in the middle, Re'ei Bonyenu V'ri Ra'avenu Ugalenu Mehira Leman Shemecha Ki Goel Ata Chazak Ata Baruch Ata Hashem Goel Yisrael. And at the end, right? Elokai Nitzor Asei Lemancha Leman Shemecha Asei Leman Yeminecha Asei Leman. Do it for your name's sake. The beginning, the end, and the middle. It's all this concept of, and all of prayer, as we'll see hopefully soon, in the Nefesh HaChaim, how all of prayer is the intention, the motivation, all of our lives, in other words, is not what's in it for me, what's my personal benefit, but what we call idealistic. In other words, what he said before, this drive for all what we live for and what we desire is for your good to be revealed, for the tikkun olam, like we ended the prayers every day in Aleinu, letaken olam malchut shaddai, to fix this world under your kingdom, to connect all of existence. That's what we say at the end of Aleinu, all of flesh and all the forces, everything connected. Not just we should save ourselves, be good for me, physically or spiritually. Not this selfish desire. We mentioned the path of the just, right, over and over again, how this sof-sof, the person who serves for his world to come and his benefit, sof-sof, he's worshiping himself, serving himself. The intention that has to be, the focus, is... Yeah.
It feels kind of chutzpahdik that we're using it in the prayer, because if Hashem should be showing mercy for His name's sake, surely we should have been better behaved for His name's sake.
Of course we have to. Doesn't oblige. How do you say? We don't have an obligation to be good, because anyway, for His name's sake, it'll all be saved in the good. But we have individual free will. What our part we take in all this? Our free will but again, our free will of doing the good for what sake? For what's in it for me. In other words, the reward and punishment. We mentioned the yirat onesh,
right.
Fear of punishment. In other words, all worried about myself. That's what he says here. Ultimately, you're serving yourself. But it has to be for the sake of the goodness of the world, of creation, of reality, of meaning your name. That's what's at stake. We mentioned the path of the just. And what are we worried about the redemption of Israel for? Whatever, because it is impossible for the honor of God to be revealed in the world except through the redemption of Israel and their honor. And there's more sources we mentioned. The Rambam and the laws of Hilchot Shuvah, chapter 10. What is the intention? What is our life for? What are we all about? We're on a shlichut. We mentioned last week, I think. We're messengers.
It's like if God forbid you went somewhere and your kids are running all amok around the wedding hall or whatever. I think we were wedding on Wednesday, and then they come to you and they say, "Sorry, Dad, forgive us because it'll look bad to you. It'll look bad on you if you have to discipline us."
No, because what you're doing, we're messing up your ideal, your good in the world. Not just a personal thing. What you look bad.
We've just done the very thing that we're asking.
Right.
We've desecrated the name, and we're saying to God, basically, have mercy on us, lest you desecrate your name. Yet that's the very thing we've just been doing.
Because we're so worried about the goal, we did wrong, which desecrated your name, which messed up your ideal. And we're requesting that you come back and connect to us and fix us and make us help us be better. We're coming back to recognize because we want to live for your goal. We didn't do so. You're right. We didn't do so. We weren't acting properly. We weren't living according to that ideal. But what bothers us is not because, oh, help me because I'm worried about my punishment. Please don't punish me because it hurts. It hurts me that the good that I prevented, like the child that wakes up and says to the father, I'm sorry what I did. I realize what I'm doing is not just for me, whatever. I was going against the good that you wanted to bring, that you wanted to bestow. The ideal. In other words, to be more idealistic. That's what all the Torah is about. Is to be giants of spirit, giants of human beings. That's what it means to be, not just religious. Someone does the religious thing and he's just worried about himself, very selfish, very private, it's all focused on himself. And he's also religious. He does all the command. What it said to do, and I'll do it. That the Gemara says in Sotah, who is a Hasid Shoteh? Who is this, so to speak, quote unquote, righteous person? He that says, Ma chovati ve'esena. What's my obligation? And I'll do it. You have to do this? Okay, put an X. 3 times to go to prayer. I went to prayer. I say I did it. And he goes back to living his life as a regular person, selfish and just, again, hitting this, whatever it is. But rather a person who lives justice, who lives goodness, who lives, like he said, the drive to be normal. That's our normal, that's our neshama. That's our a priori, that's our created essence. To not do so is not normal, it's against yourself. And our request in the prayers is, God, we realize what we did, what we messed up, is not just, I'm worried about my, retribution or what will happen to me. That's what bothers me. What bothers me is that I disrupted this beautiful plan in the world, which also was me by going against myself. It's going against not just some external religious Judaism. The Torah is not some external dictum we said written in the books and you have to live accordingly. It's your written inside. That's your neshama. That's your normalcy. To be good, to be healthy. That's the most normal thing. That's why it brings the greatest simcha, the joy, to be yourself, to be your true self, your super self. That's the real you. We have all these different things because there's free will in the world. And all these temptations that pull us to other things. And either voices say, no, the real me is, the me wants that, the me wants other things. And that's what we learn Torah, whatever, more and more to wake up that inner drive, to reach the point that so we'll talk about it soon, that you get to the point that your inner drive is, the real you comes out, that you live that, not because the book says and you do it. Imagine a sick person has to read the book. What it had to be, he's supposed to breathe how many times a minute, so he breathes because it says it in the book. But the book is written after him. In other words, the being normal, this is what you do, this is what the normalcy is. So we have a normal inner neshama, that's what Rav Kook calls the skula, the inner divine dimension, what he calls here the implanted nature. That's immutable, that's godly given, that's an act of creation. Then there's the free will. You can hear other voices. And that's what enables a free will. That's why God wanted that way, that man chooses out of free will, out of like animals and angels, so to speak. Each one, they did their job they live according to their nature without any pulls in other directions. They just do what they're meant to do. But man has this choice. And that's why the goal, the greatness is doing out of choice, doing out of recognition and awareness and living yourself. But the ultimate goal is to be your true self. And you reach the point then, first at the beginning, it's external, so to speak. You don't know. We don't have this inner drive to put on tefillin. The child wakes up and he's already born. The Avot lived like that, right? The fathers, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, kept the Torah before it was given. They didn't need a book. They didn't have a book. They lived it. It was, like I said, you breathe how many times? In other words, they lived Torah. That was their nature. They lived their nature. But now we need that external book to tell us who we really are, because you have other voices. So at the beginning, it's, so to speak, external. You have to read what it says and do it. And then more and more, that enables getting rid of the outside interferences. And then you start hearing the inner voice. And you live that. It's life. And then the joy, the happiness of living your nature, the most healthy, the most happy thing there is, to be your true self. A lot more to talk about, but I wanted to, on this topic, Sorry.
I'm a little bit confused because you are talking about the free will we have,
Okay.
and on the other side we say everything is coming from Hashem.
Okay.
Everything, also the choices we make, they are coming from.
So that's another
So
deep
this is
question. That's what the Rambam asked. How can they write? That's the famous question: free will and God's knowing. If God knows and God predetermined, so to speak, so how can we have free will? That's another question I don't want to get to now. We'll talk about that. That's an important question. It's the Rambam answers other with the verse that his ways, we can't understand his ways. What does it mean? How can you have free will if he already knows what you're going to do? So it's already predetermined. But that's the famous question. But here our topic, what I wanted is now the prayers, how this idea of being idealistic, that's what Leman Shemecha means, for your name's sake, that I'm living for it all of my life. The prayers aren't just those words, why to forgive us, But our whole lives are leman shemecha, to bring about the fulfillment. That's our neshama, first of all. This inner. Rav Kook writes in Orot Yisrael, chapter 1, paragraph 4, that the inner essence, he talks about the 7 levels, but the inner kernel of the essence of the soul, the spiritual soul, the life force of the nation of Israel, is this desire for I think I mentioned it last week, right? The absolute good for all. The unlimited good. No limits to the quantity of the good you wish to, the quality of the good you wish to bestow, and no limits to the quantity of those you wish to bestow that good upon. That's first of all, our neshama. That's what he calls here, Dr. Sabin, that inner drive for goodness, for tzedek, for justice, for righteousness, for good. And then we have to live up to that. In other words, but our lives are more the study and learning and the prayers to bring that out, to awake us up, to get rid of the interference, lo taturu, don't go after your eyes and other things that pull you away from, distract you from being who you really are. They're not minimizing your life. You can't do this, you can't do this. It's like a doctor says, don't eat this poison, that's not good for you. It's not like he's limiting my diet. I want to eat whatever I want to eat. But he tells you, no, not that it's not, he's like you're limited, you're missing something. Those things are not good for you, they're poison. He says, don't eat that. And that'll enable you to be healthy, to live your true life. So too, the Torah, the mitzvot, is how to live, to reveal, to release that energy of your neshama, to be your true self, your super self. It's not less life, it's even more life. But that's another topic, but it's connected. This whole thing of the devotion, the concentration and the focus and what is our intention in the prayers and all of our lives and all the Torah, and you see throughout the Tanakh, is this to be, in simple word, idealistic, to be righteous, to be good, to want to bestow.
Ideological.
No, idealistic, in other words, for ideal, for goodness, to bring about more good to the world. I'm here to add light to this world. Each one has a unique contribution. What?
Ideological. Idealism is like a third grader. These are different things.
To seeking an ideal, seeking good, something that is good,
Ideology.
Beyond. Ideology it can be anything, an ideology of whatever you want to use. Maybe my English isn't... but it's called an ideal, like a divine ideal, what I call it. I want to bestow or continue or to manifest God's goodness in the world. But we'll see that soon. Quickly. In Avinu Malkeinu, before we get to the Tachanun, right? Avinu Malkeinu, right? After the Shemona Esrei, or other times when we say it in the fast days, other Avinu Malkeinu, Aseh Leman Shemecha. Father, our King, deal kai for the sake of your name. Avinu Malkeinu, Aseh Leman Cha. Do it for your sake, if not for us. Avinu Malkeinu, Aseh Leman Cha Boshienu. Do it for your sake and deliver us. Avinu Malkeinu, Aseh Leman Rachamecha Rabim. Your lofty mercy, which is again a level of this divine, transcending goodness. I wrote this down. I put them all together and I just collected them. Avinu Malkeinu, Aseh Leman Shimcha Gadol. Your great name that is called upon us, etc. And then in the Tachanun itself. So I asked you once to count how many times you see this concept of Leman Shemecha. You can see here, it's over and over again. I just copied the Tachanun prayer here, but we don't have time to go through each one. But you can see of over and over again, if our sins are bad, and deliver us, and why? For your holy name's sake. Because what's at stake here, what we're worried about, is not ourselves, it's for that bigger goal, that your name that we have defiled, what we are held up from expressing. And that's what we'll talk about later, Yechezkel 36. So that's why God brings us back to Israel, not for our sake, not because we're so deserving, but there's something that transcends that. There is the free will level. Each one will be rewarded and punished according to his deeds, how much you fit into that bigger plan. But the bigger plan will be, that's Leman Shemecha, my big name, right? In Yechezkel 36, my big name, my holy name. When we read it this Shabbat, pay attention. So anyway, there's many, many times here. Depends how you count them, but over many, many times. It's the central, the theme, what you can call, in the Tachanun prayer. But I wanted to read to you, maybe, just to finish up, since I mentioned already, Nefesh HaChaim, the student of the Vilna Gaon. So I mentioned how the Vilna Gaon, in his commentary to the Mishnah, Shnot Eliyahu, in Brachot, chapter 5, it says you're supposed to pay focus, or put your attention before prayer. You should focus on that you're standing before the Hamakom, before God. But he says, what are you supposed to focus? What are you thinking? And he says there that all the prayers, it's forbidden to pray for the individual, only for the completion of Knesset Yisrael. We mentioned what you asked last week, right? Knesset Yisrael, that's the Shekhinah, that's God's name, that's the root of, not our personal life force. That's the collective roots above of this divine content, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, this divine ideal, the name of God, that is the roots of the Jewish people, that in history is revealed through individuals and people for the last thousands of years, etc. But it doesn't start with it. The life force, the collective life force, let's call it, and has a content. That life force is like Again, like Dr. Sabin says, he feels the life content of that is this drive for goodness. It doesn't mean, again, a non-Jew cannot be good. We'll have another topic, what the difference is that as an individual, to be good, to choose good. And like I said, a Jew can be very evil and corrupt and rotten, etc. But that's not his nature, his inner nature, his transcending nature, his what do we call it? There's a conscious, there's a subconscious, there's a superconscious. The superconscious, this supernal level. And that's what we're talking about here. The prayers, he says, the Nefesh HaChaim. So I said it, the Vilna Gaon said you're supposed to pray for the completion, not for your private benefit, but for the completion of God's name in the world, of his ideal in the world. In other words, like I said, idealistic person that wants altruistic for the good of all. The Nefesh HaChaim, his student, in this Rav Chaim Volozhin, a very deep book that talks about the inner workings of the effect, the efficacy of our actions, thought, speech, and thoughts, parallel to the nefesh, ruach, neshama level. Anyway, these three levels of our existence, how they influence literally all the world, how they open up gates of light and life to call all of creation. The acts that you do, you think, I'm just, like we mentioned, the little child that pushes the button in the war room, whatever. He's connected to things that have big effects on the world. So the Nefesh HaChaim says here, to explain, what, you're not allowed to pray for yourself? You're allowed to pray. It says when someone is sick, you're allowed to pray for their being healthy. You're allowed to add your own private prayers and Shomea Tefillah. So what do you mean you're not allowed to pray for the individual? So we'll see what context. Even that you're allowed to, but what context, even that. So he says here, I don't have time to read the whole thing. This is in what's called gate number 2. There's the 4 gates, the 4 sha'arim in Nefesh HaChaim. Gate number 2, he talks about prayer. In chapter 11, at the end of chapter 10, he talks about how each word in the prayer was written by among them, prophets that wrote the prayers that we have. I'm connecting it on, the prophets amongst them. Each word is directed at, has an effect. It's not like it's approximate, whatever. It's an exact, like a science. It's metaphysics. Of these words open up, call it valves of energy, of light, of goodness to the world. When you say these words, they have an effect. It's not just an idea or objective reality. And therefore, he says, when you pray, you are. It's fitting for the righteous person to apply his entire attention or intention, and clarity of thought related to his prayers, so as only to increase the strength given to the holy world. So in other words, to add good, to add the upper light and the spiritual levels of the divine, to bring that to expression in our world, in the three-dimensional world, the problematic world. Like we said, the body, what we see, the physical, is the lower dimension of all this goodness of absolute, call it the divine light that is waiting, that God wishes to bestow. It's already there. We just have to open up. Let that come into the world. We put all these filters and blocks and clouds between the sun, this light, and the world that we live in. The prayer opens up, and your intention should be to manifest, to enable more and more the manifestation of that. It's called like strengthening above, letting the good of above, divine good, to be revealed, and to draw down blessings and light to all, to cause the spirit of impurity to pass from the world, to rectify the world in his sovereignty, and not in any way towards his own concerns or personal needs. That's where your focus is supposed to be. Again, this is Nefesh HaChaim Sharbet, chapter 11. As we see, especially at Rosh Hashanah, I think I read you once, before Rosh Hashanah, the introduction of the Vilna Gaon to the Siddur on Rosh Hashanah, the prayers, how the whole prayer, but here he mentions it also, that the whole prayer, from the beginning to the end, is for the name of God, should be exalted and revealed in this world. For your kingdom, what does that mean, your kingdom? God wants us to, he needs like honor. We have God, you're great, you're great, you're great. He doesn't, in other words, the honor of God, the manifestation is to reveal that good, that greatness, that divine, that life, that justice and holiness in this world, that your name should be revealed in the world. That's what it means. And that's all the prayers are based on that the world should come back to what it was before the sin of Adam Rishon and beyond that. And so to the wording of the daily prayer service, not just Rosh Hashanah. There it's so clear that it's only, you're not supposed to pray, right? There's no al-chet, you mentioned, right? There's no confession on Rosh Hashanah. We spoke about that, why they're preventing us. The rabbi said not to confess, but I want to confess before the day of judgment. I want to come out clean and say, I'm sorry, I did this. No, because now it's not you. It's not what you're not supposed to be concerned with, what's in it for me. But now you're focusing on God, your name, what's at stake. And later, Yom Kippur, you come down and now that I realize what's at stake, Now I'm sorry for, and delineate, so to speak, and recognize that here I did this, here I, like you said, the child that recognizes what I did was holding up this great ideal for all of creation. I'm sorry for that, not because of I'm worried about myself. I'm sorry for how could I do things that hold up this light, this goodness of all of mankind, all of reality, like the animal kingdom, right? The lamb living with the wolf. It's a different world, the energy, the beautiful oneness of all under God, connected to all. But he says it's also in the daily prayers. Even though it superficially appears to be mostly organized relative to the matters of our personal needs. We ask for wisdom, we ask for this, and we ask for other things, and livelihood. But it is clear to all who really understand, as can be determined from its context, that the note of the Great Assembly did not intend the plain meaning of the words, as I wrote above, that every word here has its deeper significance and effect. And even though it's clearly taught as a legal ruling in the Talmud that the individual is permitted to add statements in his prayers relating to his personal needs and suffering in each blessing, you're allowed to ask for this and this person to be healthy and this livelihood. So what do you mean? The Vilna Gaon, your teacher, says you're not supposed to pray for the individual. So he explains what the Vilna Gaon meant is that you're allowed to. The law, we know that the law is you're allowed to, but even that, the primary intention should not be his own personal suffering. That is not the correct approach for these who are righteous, but rather go. Anyway, so it goes on there, but rather for the, I must have it here, for the Shekhinah that is lacking. That if one Jew is sick, it says, he brings down the verses there. I wanted to know, it's important, the rest. The continuation is also important. It's here amongst the pages, but I can tell you orally, that he goes on to say there, he brings down the Midrashim. Yeah, where did it go? How, wow, interesting.
Which book is it?
Nefesh HaChaim. Anyway, he brings down the sources. Weird. It was right here. Oh, here it is. Not right here. So even then, the personal deficiency, what bothers you is not my stomach. God help me, my stomach hurts. But rather, if a Jew is sick, if this one person is lacking, is deficient, then your name is deficient. If there's one hole in the cup, so to speak, then it doesn't hold water. The Shekhinah, and he brings down the sources. The purpose and intention must only be as a lofty necessity. In other words, meaning for the sake of heaven and not for one's needs. Because in a place where it's at the desecration of his name, as when the community of Israel is suffering, and he brings down the verse from Yechezkel 36, which is what we're learning, and what we'll read this Haftarah Shabbat. When it said, these are the nation of God. So we're not worried about what our personal, patriotic, worried about the Jewish people. But our name, when we're suffering, like Rashi, I read you in the Yechezkel 39, when we're suffering, when we're not complete, then your name is not complete. The world's goal is lacking. And therefore, what we're worried about is your name. And then even the individual, to do it only for the sake of his name, he says. And so to the individual, regarding his own suffering, even if there's no desecration of his name, it's not a dechilul Hashem when some person is sick. He says yes. Because when a person suffers in this world, then it's the Shekhinah. God says, and he brings down from the Gemara and Sanhedrin, when a person regrets, he says, the Shekhinah saying, my head hurts, my arm hurts, I'm being disgraced by my arm. In other words, the Shekhinah is lacking. And he brings down the Midrashim that connects the Jewish people with the nation, with God's name. And he brings down the verse that we saw in Tehillim 91, I am with him in times of distress. When the Jews are in distress and mine, God is with us. Imo anochi b'tzara. That all the redemption that comes to Israel is God's redemption. And he says, we couldn't say it. The Midrash says this. We couldn't say it. But that's what it says in the verses. He says, he brings down the verses. Lishuatcha, right? We say in the prayer, Lishuatcha kivitu. Your God, your salvation we're praying for. We're hoping for. We're praying for our salvation. No. This is one of the verses that we couldn't say. It's hard to say even. But in the Tanchuma, the rabbis say that this redemption of God is the redemption of Israel. Because it doesn't say Yeshuatenu, our redemption. Rather, Bishuatcha, your redemption. Why? For his redemption is our redemption. They're one and the same that we've been seeing over and over again. That's the summary of what we've been seeing. I wanted to get to in Yechezkel 36, continue the prophecy there, the stages of redemption, which we brought that for. But to understand the context, when we read on this on Shabbat, pay attention, when Yechezkel 36, it's the redemption that comes in the stage way, the slow way we've been talking about, right? The natural redemption, stage by stage. Jews come back to the land, they're not religious, and then later they come back, and then they start doing the mitzvot. it's a whole process that's mentioned there, the very practical, realistic redemption, and that's the Parshat Parah. Parshat Parah is what? The secret that even no one understands, how the Tumah is eradicated from the world. Right? The Parah Duma, that even the death, the source of death is eradicated. The secret of how the red heifer, how it works, is the biggest secret, and how is that revealed in this world? In the most natural, developmental process unfolding, that inner secret that's being revealed in history through this process of Yechezkel. That's why the rabbis put them together. We read the Haftarah of Yechezkel 36, the revealed redemption, this natural redemption process. On the Shabbat, we talk about the Parah, because that's the content of this redemption. What we're living in now, these days, literally, the returning of these stages, but what's unfolding here, what's coming back, what's pushing, what's at the roots of all this process. And our goal is to recognize it and to help it to be realized and more manifested, is this deeper, loftiest thing of the Tikkun HaKol, the fixing of all of creation, until the eradication of evil and suffering and even of death. B'ezrat Hashem, Shabbat Shalom.